At 8:37 the registrar opened the folder. She stood perfectly still under the white arch, veil catching the light. Her fingers brushed the edge of her dress once, then again. The groom smiled at the guests. She did not. On the table beside her lay 2 phones. One was hers. The other was new, matte black, no case. It had not been there during the rehearsal dinner. I watched her glance at it for half a second longer than necessary. Then she looked straight ahead again, as if nothing had changed. But the second phone stayed face down. Screen already lit. I looked at the invitation once, then again. The date, the time, the location. I opened the calendar on my phone. 8:40, same day, same hour. The court hearing for her financial case, the one dragging on for months, sat right there in black and white. I did not move. I only registered the overlap. 2 things that had no right to touch each other lined up perfectly. I placed the phone face down on the table. Then I picked up the invitation again. The paper felt heavier now. The gold lettering caught the light from the desk lamp at 23:17. My thumb traced the edge without pressing. The venue was downtown, 23 minutes from the courthouse by foot if the traffic stayed light. I knew the route. I had walked it before. I set the card back exactly where it had been. The second hand on the wall clock swept past 23:18, then 23:19. Nothing in the room changed. The same low hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen. The same faint smell of yesterday's coffee. Yet the air felt thinner. I checked the calendar one more time. The hearing was listed as closed session. No public spectators. Her name appeared only as the defendant. I closed the app. The invitation still waited on the table, its corner slightly lifted from the wood. I stared at the empty space between the 2 dates that were no longer empty. Something small and precise had just clicked into place. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply turned the phone face down again and let the silence stretch. At 23:22 the screen stayed dark. But I already knew I would be in both places that morning. The question was which one would come first. I started the search at 23:41 without hurry. One folder opened after another. First came the overdue payments. Red stamps across statements from 3 different banks. Then the court notices, dated back 4 months, each one tighter than the last. Lines on 2 properties. Frozen accounts linked to a deadline exactly 31 days away. The structure revealed itself slowly, piece by piece. She had no room left to move. Every exit was already blocked. I leaned back in the chair and kept scrolling. The marriage license draft appeared at 23:47. Not as a ceremony. Not as a promise. Just a legal instrument. A clean reset button for asset protection. The timing aligned perfectly with the final hearing date. Her name sat at the top. Mine appeared lower, only as a signature line. No title. No description. Simply the required field that would stabilize everything. I stopped there. The cursor hovered over the empty space where my name waited to be typed. I did not close the files. Instead, I opened a new tab and pulled up the courthouse calendar again. The closed session at 8:40 still stared back. Then I returned to the marriage documents. A single clause at the bottom caught the light from the screen. It referenced a prior agreement, one I had never seen. The reference number belonged to a sealed file from 2 years earlier. I copied the number. The folder count in the corner of the screen read 43 documents still unopened. At 23:52 the room stayed silent except for the low fan noise of the laptop. I left every window open. Because the more I looked, the clearer it became that the marriage was never meant to be the end. It was only the next move in a longer game. And I still had not found who had written the rules. I opened the timeline at 03. The pieces began repeating with mechanical precision. The engagement had been announced exactly 19 days after the latest court notice. The venue chosen was the most expensive rooftop in the city, booked for a date that left no buffer. No discussion of cost. No mention of savings. Just a signature on the deposit receipt. I kept scrolling. Her past stayed blank in every shared document. No old photos surfaced. No stories from before we met. The social media trail stopped cleanly 2 years earlier, right at the first sealed filing. I returned to the court registry at 08. The demand was surgical. Personal appearance or a verified change in financial status no later than the wedding date. The deadline matched the ceremony hour to the minute. 8:40 became the pivot point. The entire event no longer felt like a wedding. It looked like a procedure. I closed the browser tab and reopened it immediately. The same entry stared back, unchanged. No one else would connect these lines. The short engagement, the sudden venue, the missing history, the exact overlap of deadlines. They all sat in plain sight, yet remained invisible to anyone who was not looking for the pattern. I leaned forward and highlighted the final court entry. The cursor blinked at 012. I understood the shape now. This was never about us. It was a transaction dressed in white, and I was the only one who saw the scaffolding underneath. At 014, I shut the laptop. The decision settled in the silence. I would be inside that courthouse at 8:40, not as a spectator, not as the groom, but as the variable no one had accounted for. I stood at the edge of the room at 1912. The rehearsal dinner moved without a single missed beat. Waiters circled with quiet efficiency. Glasses clinked at exact intervals. The groom remained steady at the center table, shoulders squared, smile measured. Every gesture already fitted into the script. I watched from the periphery, untouched. He never looked my way. Later, at 21:47, I positioned myself near the side exit where the voices carried clearest. The conversation drifted across the half-empty tables. Words about immediate consolidation of accounts the moment the registration papers were signed. Joint holdings. Immediate transfer of title. Full access granted at 9 o'clock the next morning. The details shifted everything. This was no longer only her construction. A second figure had stepped into the frame, calm and unaware of the wires attached to him. I remained motionless against the wall. The groom's reflection appeared briefly in the dark window glass. He raised a glass, nodded once, then returned to the scripted ease. The threat no longer stopped at her. It now included the man who believed he was simply marrying into stability. The outline widened in perfect silence. At 22:03, I stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights stretched below the terrace. Indifferent, I lit no cigarette. I made no call. I simply stood there while the shape of the next morning hardened into something irreversible. Because by 8:40 tomorrow, two men would arrive at the same building expecting different outcomes. Only one of us would leave with the truth, and the other would never see it coming. I arrived at 8:10. The venue was already perfect. Crisp white chairs arranged in flawless rows. Soft morning light filtered through tall glass panels. Guests moved in quiet clusters, adjusting flowers, checking phones, smiling the practiced smiles of people who believed they were attending a beginning. Everything looked under control, but small fractures had begun to appear. She checked her phone at 8:13, then again at 8:14. Each glance lasted half a second longer than the last. Her fingers tightened around the device before sliding it back into place. Pauses stretched between her steps. The hem of her dress brushed the floor with unnatural hesitation. Time had quietly turned against her. I remained near the side colonnade, half hidden by a tall floral arrangement, watching without moving closer. At 8:17, a side door near the rear entrance opened. Three figures entered without ceremony. Dark suits, no boutonnieres, no smiles. One carried a slim leather folder. Another held a tablet. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. No rush. Only precise, measured steps toward the main hall. They did not blend in. I tracked their path as they stopped just inside the threshold, scanning the room once, then settling into position near the registrar's table. The clock on the far wall clicked to 8:19. She glanced toward the rear entrance again. Her shoulders shifted by a fraction. The phone came out one more time. The white structures around us remained immaculate. But the air had grown heavier, as if the entire morning had been waiting for this exact alignment. I stayed motionless, because at 8:40 the real ceremony would begin. And these three visitors had not come to celebrate. They had come to witness the signature that would either save everything or end it. The only question left was whose name would actually appear on the final line. I stood at the back of the hall at 8:37. The final act of the ceremony had begun. She stood beside the groom under the white arch. The registrar opened the folder with slow ceremony. Pens lay ready on the table. The guests leaned forward in perfect silence. Then the system broke. At 8:39, the side door opened again. The three figures in dark suits stepped forward without announcement. One carried the leather folder. Another held official documents stamped in red. They walked straight to her and stopped at arm's length. The registrar's hand froze mid-air. The process halted without any physical force. The groom remained perfectly still, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, trapped inside a structure he could not read. Guests shifted in their seats. Phones stayed lowered. No one spoke. No one understood the new script unfolding in front of them. The papers were presented. Dates, account numbers, court seals. Each line erased every previous version of the morning. The financial status changed in real time. The marriage could no longer serve its purpose. The silence thickened until it pressed against the glass walls. The event stopped being a wedding. It became a termination. I remained exactly where I was, hands in my pockets, watching the collapse with clinical detachment. Her eyes found mine for less than a second. No plea, no question, only recognition. I turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, at 8:41, cars moved along the street with ordinary indifference. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to rise, faint at first, then sharper. I did not look back. The procedure continued without me, unfinished and already irrelevant. Because the real ending had never been written for that room. It waited somewhere else, and only one of us knew the address.